Bluegrass Jamalong is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas. This episode is also brought to you by Peghead Nation, the home of roots music instruction. If you want to improve your playing, join me and thousands of other pickers getting better every day at pegheadnation.com. Hi, this is Matt, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jamalong, the podcast for anyone and everyone who loves bluegrass. Hey everybody, welcome back to Bluegrass Jamalong. This week I have a really cool interview for you with Sarah Jarosz, and it sort of came about because I've been chatting about various things on the podcast over the last year and just sort of making connections and realising that so many bits of music I've talked about have come out of FreshGrass commissions, whether it's Jerry Douglas or Jacob Jolliffe or Sierra Hull or Becky Buller. So much music that I love has come out of being commissioned by FreshGrass. And one of my favourite records has come out of that, which is Sarah Jarosz's Blue Heron Suite. So I reached out to Sarah's people and just asked if she'd be up for coming on the podcast to talk about it, expecting to get a sort of, no, it's not kind of the current album, we're not talking about that one now kind of thing, and got a reply just saying, yes, Sarah's really keen to talk about it. And I found out a couple of weeks later it's coming back out as a physical release, so it was just really good timing. But we just have a chat about that. I just love this record. It's such a little sound world and a little kind of experience. I love a record that takes you on a bit of a journey like this, and so I was delighted to get the chance to talk to Sarah about it, and that's what you're going to hear. And interestingly, I also reached out to FreshGrass and asked if they would fancy having a chat as well, because I was really keen to talk to them about the commissioning process and how all that worked as well. So stick around next week, because there's also a conversation coming up with FreshGrass about how they commissioned, why, how it all started, all of that stuff. So do stick around and listen to that one next week. But for now, here is my interview with Sarah Jarosz about Blue Heron Suite. Enjoy. My guest on Bluegrass Jamalong this week is Sarah Jarosz, who I would be delighted to chat to at pretty much any point in time, but I'm particularly excited about this episode because it's about one of my favourite records, which is Blue Heron Suite. Sarah, great to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's really cool. I love talking about people's new records, but there's something really cool talking about a record that's been out for a while and you've had time to think about and digest and really get lost in. And I love this one. It's a really special record, and it feels like it occupies kind of a really special place in your timeline as well. And I'd love to talk about that. But I'd love to start with how it all kicked off, because this was commissioned as a FreshGrass piece, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So it goes back to 2017, which is when I believe it was only the second year that FreshGrass had been doing these commissions. I think Bill Frisell was the first, if I'm correct in my memory. And yeah, so I had performed at FreshGrass. I've loved that festival for years before 2017. And so when they reached out to me asking if I would write a piece of music specifically to premiere at their festival, I was very intrigued. And, I think especially at that time, there was nothing really that I could compare it to in the acoustic music world. I really associate commissions, pieces of music being commissioned with the classical world. That's just something you see much more in that world. So I thought it was really cool that they were doing this in the first place, and I was honored that they asked me to do it. And so, yeah, it being 2017, their only real rule when they reached out to me was the piece of music needs to be between 30 and 45 minutes in length. And that they said you can do anything with that amount of time, but it needs to be this amount. And, so hearing that, I knew that it was going to be a substantial undertaking, because that's that's like the length of most albums. And so it wasn't just writing a song or writing even a 10-minute little piece. It was really writing I knew that it was going to be a major commitment. But at that time, my mom had just been diagnosed with breast cancer a few months prior to them asking me to do this. And, initially when they asked, I was feeling very overwhelmed with all of that going on. But then I kind of thought about it and I realized that, what better way to sort of pour all of that emotion than maybe that could be the sort of inspiration for that. And then I kind of zeroed in on this image of the great blue heron, which we can get into more as we go along. But that really became the sort of guiding force behind writing this piece.
And did that sort of image come before any of the music? Was that sort of a thing that arrived as like an idea almost?
Totally. Yeah. I think, when my mom was first diagnosed and started doing the intense chemo and all that, I was also I was very busy touring at the time. So I was being with her as much as I could, but I wasn't able to be there, for a lot of that. Thankfully, my dad was there with her but I started thinking about the blue heron, because I grew up in Texas. I grew up in a tiny town called Wimberley, which is south of Boston in the hill country. But ever since I was a baby, my parents were both school teachers. And so because of that, they had the summers off. And ever since I was a baby, we would drive down 3 hours to a little town called Port Aransas, which is near Corpus Christi on the Gulf Coast of Texas. And I have one of my strongest memories for my whole life is seeing great blue herons there and oftentimes they're alone. They're not birds that sort of flock together. It would be a solitary bird, either flying or standing on the shore. And for as long as I can remember, whenever my mom would see one, she would say that it was a good omen and that it was a good sign and that something good would happen that day and that it was watching over me or watching over us. And so, when she was going through this tough time, I came back around to that memory. And particularly when I couldn't be with her through that, if I saw one out in the world, it was like, oh, okay. I feel comforted. I feel a little more hope today. Like she's going to get through this. And so that really, and then obviously just the color blue, like blue has always been my favorite color. It's so many songs utilize the word blue. And so that also sort of naturally felt like it was something that there was just so much imagery once I realized that was the single image that was going to be the inspiration behind the piece. Just all these images started flooding, into my brain and really the whole thing just kind of took off from there.
And it's really interesting just hearing you talk about that because it feels like, and it's interesting as a listener because experiencing Heron Suite when it came out versus where it sort of sits in your creative, it came out at a very different point to when you were putting it together. But it feels like a record that is full of imagery. The lyrics are maybe, is it fair to say, a little bit less sort of like confessional than on Undercurrent, and it's a movement towards more kind of image-based lyrics and slightly less direct. And the music as well is much more like it is texture and colour in sound. It's, and so I found that fascinating to hear that just it was an image that kicked it all off really, because that makes total sense when you listen to it. And was there a first sort of either lyrical piece of music that this grew from? Did something come first, or were there several things you were working on at the beginning? We'll be right back with you just after this. The long-awaited Hill Country series from Collins Guitars represents a new voice in their acoustic lineup. Rooted deep in the bluegrass world, these new Dreadnought and OM models feature a strong fundamental tone with a dry, warm and woody character that's sure to catch the attention of players who hold the vintage instruments of the 30s in their highest regard. Watch world-class pickers Jake Workman, Kenny Smith and Bob Minner perform with new Hill Country instruments on the Collins Guitars YouTube channel, and learn more at collinsguitars.com. This episode is also brought to you by Peghead Nation, the home of roots music instruction. With 65 streaming video courses for guitar, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, dobro, bass and ukulele from some of the leading names in acoustic music, Peghead Nation has something for every picker. You'll learn the tunes and techniques you need to join in at jams and play the music you love, plus advanced techniques like improvisation, theory and ear training. Your first course is just $20 per month, and you can add more for $10 a month. Sign up for any course and get your first month free with the promo code JAMALONG, all one word. Join thousands of other players, including me, who are advancing on their instruments and having more fun playing the roots music they love at pegheadnation.com.
It's hard to remember what exactly came first because I was really writing it in these little vignettes, and it took a while for me to even realize that it was a suite or a song cycle that I wanted to create. Because initially, I kind of was just writing because I'm a songwriter. I was kind of just writing in my normal song way, and so now that I say that, what probably happened was the two sort of most song-like, or there's really the three most song-like songs on the record are Morning, Painted Blue, which is kind of in the middle, and then Blue Heron at the very end. And so I feel like maybe those three were the anchors. And then I kind of started having these little smaller ideas, and I realized, this has to be listened to as a full piece. And then it was just kind of flushing out those ideas and figuring out how they fit together in terms of creating this. I wanted to sort of create to have the music mimic the emotional roller coaster of hearing that type of news or just even any difficult thing that someone might go through with a loved one. Kind of, the moments of desperation and then kind of the chaotic moments where you feel like life is just getting away from you, and then the overwhelming moments, and then kind of the calmer, introspective, where things you kind of feel like you have more perspective on the situation. And so it was figuring out how to sort of piece those things together to create those feelings.
Yeah, and that's fascinating because the first track, like Mama, is very isolated and vulnerable and alone, which is like presumably how you feel when you first try and process something. You kind of do it on your own before you kind of look to other people. And it does come full circle to this, that Blue Heron's got a real sort of settled kind of confidence about it that you feel like you've arrived at the point of a journey when you get to that song. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about that. But there are threads, kind of both lyrical and sort of musically thematic, and just sound through, like almost like textural threads that run through. It's maybe the most kind of complete of the FreshGrass commissions I've heard in terms of everything being woven through it. And lots of people put songs together that tell a story or take you on an arc or have a 3-movement concerto or whatever. But this feels like it's much more inseparable from each other. Mm-hmm. And I know you play some of the songs on their own. They make total sense as songs, but there's something about hearing them all together.
Yeah. Well, thanks for saying that. I do hope I did one tour, very short tour, at the end, because this, as you sort of alluded to, I wrote this in 2017, performed it the one time, at FreshGrass that fall. And then, it didn't come out until 2021. And, obviously this was May of 2021. So some performances were starting to happen, but it was still pandemic affecting shows. And so I was able to do one short run of supporting this record at the end of 2021, where I played the entire suite. And I do hope, I think the cool thing about this music is that I think I'll always be able to, even if I'm kind of supporting a newer record or something, this music will always, in a way, it's the most personal thing I've written, and it'll always have a special place for me. And then obviously so many people reaching out to me saying that it's helped them through a hard time. And so my hope is that maybe throughout my life, I can kind of come back to this, return to this music, and hopefully perform it live more as a whole. Because as you said, it really is, that was the intent behind the writing. It really is meant to be heard that way.
Yeah, and it is interesting with that timeline, because you've kind of got, as you say, the piece sort of started in 2017 and you recorded it right at the end of 2018. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. We did it at Reservoir Studio in New York in 2018.
And from a fan perspective, you kind of get Undercurrent, then you get I'm With Her, and then you get kind of Blue Heron Suite and World on the Ground. So it's like but listening back, because I went back and listened to Undercurrent again, and there's bits on Undercurrent like Green Lights that feel like they're sort of sliding towards Blue Heron Suite, and some slightly less obvious harmonic shifts and some slightly more textural things going on. And there's a couple more tracks on that record, Back of My Mind, with the sort of electric guitar and steel guitar kind of washes in there, and Jacqueline too maybe's got a hint of it. And so when you place it where you know it actually sits, it's a really interesting intersection between Undercurrent and everything that came after as a listener.
Yeah, that and part of that is a happy accident, and in a way, I think ideally I would have been able to, play this at FreshGrass, record it immediately. Historically, when I write something, it comes out in the order that I've written it, and so this album is an outlier for me in that it didn't come out in the order that I wrote it. But it's even interesting going back to what you said about this music being very heavily imagery based. Even though it came out after World on the Ground, it's like this music and these lyrics with these strong images of Texas, and that kind of thinking about the Gulf Coast and those childhood memories was almost what set me up to even write World on the Ground, which was then the first record of me sort of pulling from imagery from Wimberley and my childhood there and growing up there. So, but then they came out in the opposite order. So it's kind of funny how that worked, but it's, ultimately I kind of loved that it came out when it did. I think there was something about it coming out during the pandemic when there was just so much, when people couldn't be together. And I think actually more people listened to it in its entirety then because there was just more time. People were just hungry for, anything that could make them not feel alone or isolated. And so I kind of felt like, oh, that was an interesting, it almost took on this double meaning because it came out in 2021.
Well, you alluded at the beginning to this, to writing it being a kind of processing thing for you anyway. Decided to lean into it and go there because it's a way of processing what you were going through. And if you're able to do that and then give that as a gift to other people to use for similar reasons, and particularly when lyrics particularly are fairly image heavy, they can mean something to whoever hears it that doesn't necessarily need to be the same thing as it means to you. And there's something beautiful about that. It's not like a prescriptive set of lyrics that go, this means this is what I need to tell you. It's like, here's some stuff that I felt. And people take that on board, don't they, and run with it. Yeah.
And to me, that's the best thing that can happen. I strive for that. I think there's something about being extremely specific that I love in songwriting, but I always try to balance that out with enough sort of mystery for people to be able to find their own story in it, and I think of someone like Paul Simon being the best at that, where there's these hyper specific images, but then there's mystery and there's, it's just this beautiful kind of, there's space and there's air in the lyrics. And so I'm always trying to do that. It's a hard thing to do, but that's what's beautiful about music is that you just kind of keep searching for that. And I think because the emotions were just so intense at that time that maybe it made it a little clear. It was almost clearer to be able to sort of find those images in the songs, in the lyrics.
Well, and I was going to ask you about the instrumentation as well, because there's something really interesting about the fact that it's a trio and there's no drums, which sort of leaves it like room to kind of float a bit. But there's also, I think, there's no banjo on this one either. And there's something about both of those instruments that can sonically pin things down to a certain extent. And it's really interesting that they're not there, because there's a lot of space within the arrangements and a lot of space within the sound as well for it to go to a lot of different places and a lot of different textures on this record, which is part of what I love about it.
Yeah, I have to give, a huge shout out to Jeff Picker and Jefferson Hamer, who are the two other instrumentalists on the record. They just really brought this, and also I have to give a shout out to Anthony DaCosta as well, who actually performed the original piece. We were touring together at the time that I was writing this, and the premiere at FreshGrass was with Jeff and Anthony. And then by the time like you said, it was a whole year later, and I was in New York, and I had, been spending time hanging with Jefferson, and wound up being that Jefferson was on the record with me and Jeff. And yeah, I started playing in a trio, when I go back to my first shows, even when I was a teen, I played with Alex Hargraves and Nathaniel Smith. And, and then after that, I played with Jeff. Jeff has played bass with me for a long time, and always did kind of bass and guitar for a long time after that. And I just always loved the trio. The trio setting, just like you said, it just allows for so much space and room to breathe. And it, especially for this music, it was so important to me that it didn't feel too weighted down. And it almost as like a reaction to the subject matter being so heavy and so weighty, it was like the music needed to sort of push against that, being like floaty and airy, and just kind of, thinking about the coast and the way the light is on the coast and the salt water air. There's, it doesn't feel like this down in the muck kind of, I wasn't hearing grooves really, or like grooves coming from percussion. It was all needing to be grooves, and time feels coming just from the stringed instruments. And like you said, I only played octave mandolin and guitar, acoustic guitar, and then Jefferson plays electric guitar, Telecaster, and Jeff played upright bass. And so those are the only textures.
But there's something about like string bands know how to do that kind of thing without a drummer. And there's a couple of tracks on the record that have got like proper drive to them. Like they lock into a groove and they're really solid. But it's interesting hearing that done without using drums. And that's one of the things string bands know how to do, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that sort of octave mandolin and guitar rather than mandolin on this. And I know I've heard you talk a bit before about octave mandolin and the ability to use a capo and have open strings ringing and play around with that. But there's something, like one of the things I noticed listening to this record last night, I put it on late last night with headphones again. And there's so many songs that are either introduced by or driven by a kind of a picking pattern. Like there's like a rhythmic picked thing that sits behind nearly all of the record in some way. Which sort of really, really stood out this time I listened to it.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that drew me, or that allowed me to sort of feel like the octave mandolin was the instrument that unlocked my own songwriting voice in many ways. When I first started playing music or getting really serious about music, it was on the mandolin. I had always sung for as long as I can remember. And I played some guitar in my teens. My mom taught me some chords because she plays guitar. But there was something about the octave mandolin. I actually think it has, yes, there's definitely like the ringiness aspect of being able to capo it and have that. But it was really just more the range of it. It's sitting an octave lower. I just always felt like because I've always sung and played at the same time. It's very rare that I just sing without an instrument in my hands. And so the octave, it just felt like a more balanced situation. It's an octave lower. The mandolin, sometimes whenever I would go to write on the mandolin, it was almost always instrumental music. It always felt like my voice and the mandolin were fighting for the same space. And so, yeah, just this simple shift of an octave lower unlocked so many ideas for me, on going back to my first record. And as I've gotten older, that's the instrument that I gravitate towards the most because it just feels like home and it feels like me. It feels like when I'm on that instrument, I'm able to sort of access the thing about music that I'm able to bring something unique to, I guess. And because Fletcher Brock, who built the instrument, when I bought it from him back in 2007, he had it strung to where the 2 Ds and the 2 Gs were octaves apart as well. So to your question about the picking pattern, when you are doing a cross picking thing, and if you do an upstroke on the D, you're going to get the octave higher. And it kind of if you're being conscious of your picking downstrokes and upstrokes, you can utilize that as part of the melody. It's not just kind of like a happenstance thing. And I've done that in many, Build Me Up from Bones, the way it is now. I've done that in many of my songs where that actually comes into play in terms of what the actual melody is of the song. And so, yeah, I think that instrument just sort of pointed that way for me almost. And so, especially with this album, yeah, it just felt like that. There was like an undulating kind of quality to that picking pattern that almost felt like the ocean or waves in a way, and I liked that.
Yeah, it's interesting because as soon as I listened to it last night, I went and dug out Nick Drake's Pink Moon, which is like a record that I love, and another like relatively short record like this, but just it's so full of just him finding a tuning and then a pattern, and then that's sort of it for a couple of minutes. And there's something really hypnotic about it as well. And it's funny, you don't see that many people use an octave mandolin. Like Tim O'Brien will use one, and people use it, but it seems like such a natural songwriter's instrument in some ways.
Yeah, Tim, I have to give Tim the shout out because he's the reason that I was even aware of the instrument existing. And, by the time that I was 15 or I was 16 when I got my first octave mandolin, I had been saving in hopes that I might find one, but it was really hard to find one. And even the one that he had and played, I think was actually a guitar turned into an octave mandolin. And so, yeah, it just felt like totally a sign from the universe that I happened to meet Fletcher. It was at IBMA in 2007. It was just on the trade show floor. And it was like, I was just walking around, and in the back of my mind, I was like, if I ever find one of these instruments, I just feel like I need to find one of these instruments, but I couldn't find one anywhere. And sure enough, there it was. And I played it for like 30 seconds, and it was like, oh my God, bells were ringing. It was like a light went off. It was like, this is my instrument. And yeah, but they are not super common. I think they're becoming a bit more common, maybe even in the last 3 years. But even still, people are just, everywhere I go, everywhere I play, people are so curious about it, which is cool. I love it.
And there's something about the scale length of it and the double course thing, and it's just got a kind of, it sounds like an old instrument. the octave mandolin, if that makes sense. But it
Yeah.
doesn't sound like a specific thing like hearing a banjo does, or it's not a sound that people necessarily recognize, but it's got a kind of timeless, folksy quality to it. And there's some really interesting moments on the record of just like, this is music that is untethered by time and genre, and like and I was listening to the guitar solo on, which there was one track, it might have been Morning, I can't remember, but there's one of the solos it's kind of got this, it was Morning, and it's got this almost Richard Thompson quality about it, that he's able to play these melodies that don't sound major key, and they don't sound bluesy. And so they're sort of a bit ethereal but very sort of also visceral at the same time. And there's a lovely quality of that about this record as well, if you can't quite place it.
Yeah, no, and Jefferson Hamer is a huge fan of English folk music, and definitely Richard Thompson. That's cool. I hadn't thought about that connection, but I totally hear that in there, and it definitely influences Jefferson's playing.
Yeah, and it's part of, I think I love a record that, or a song or anything, but something that feels like a bit more of an experience than just putting some music on. And the first time I heard any of this was, I think it was Blue Heron came on like a random playlist on Spotify or something, and because of the nature of all the stuff that was around it, sounded a bit kind of like it didn't fight for its place in the way that stuff is intended to these days. And I was like, oh, what's that? I need to go and find that. And then went and sat and listened to the whole record. And I love getting a bit lost in an album. And it doesn't necessarily need to be that it's got a theme that runs through it. It might just be that the sound of the record is like a little world you can step into for 40 minutes and step out of again. And and it's, did you, as you wrote it, did you find yourself with like a bunch of songs that you then strung together, like the songs that themes run through? So you get, for example, Across the Canyon comes back in two slightly different forms and different time signatures. You get one song will come in later on, but with bits of an earlier track sort of woven through it. And was that sort of the final bit of the process, or was that there from the beginning?
I think that started about halfway through the process. It was, like I said, I think, in my memory, it's always a little hard to pinpoint the exact beginning of an idea, but I do think it was starting with the bigger chunks of songs. And even Mama, I think it was probably Painted Blue, Morning, and Blue Heron were like, okay, I have these songs that are very much inspired by the same thing. And then Mama was like this, that felt like it was this almost trying to write a song from the perspective of the childhood version of me, or just like the childhood version of anyone sort of calling out for their mom, just not where are you going? I need you. This just very human emotion. And then there was something about that. I think, that's reprised later on before Blue Heron. I don't know. It just kind of happened naturally, to be honest. And then yes, there was for sure a point towards the end of the process when I was like, I think I've said everything I need to say. I think all the parts are here, and now it's figuring out the way that they fit together. And I think maybe the first thing that made me realize that it was going to kind of be this piecing together of things was Across the Canyon, actually, because I liked that so much, but it kind of confused me for a while, because I was like, I don't know what this is. Like, this isn't a regular song, that I would normally write, but I love how it sounds. And it feels so important and so vital to this feeling, to this emotion that I'm trying to convey within this music. And I knew, so that was kind of the first one where I thought, oh, this would be so cool to bring this musical idea back again, at some point and sort of reference it. And so, yeah, it's a combination of happening naturally, sort of discovering throughout the process what wanted to go where, and certain things revealing themselves to me, and then kind of like a puzzle at the end, figuring out the most effective way to format it.
And I love that. So that track, it's 2 tracks on the record, Across the Canyon, because it's got that, and just hearing you talk before about the arc of it and the kind of being alone at the beginning and kind of settled more at the end, but confused in the middle. And Across the Canyon's got that on, like, in spades, because it's got this, it's like 3/3, a 3 and a 2 that throws you off constantly. And then when it comes back, it's more settled. That extra beat's in there and it gives you a bit more time. And the voices going across each other, it's got a real Guinevere quality to it. I kept expecting Graham Nash to come in first time I heard it. Do you know what I mean? You're just waiting for that extra counter melody, and I love that.
Well, it's really funny that you say that, because I was actually just about to say that David Crosby specifically loved that one, and he was like, "You wrote a song in 11? What, are you crazy?" I got to have this really special, Jeff and I got to have a really special day with him and his wife in 2021, right after this came out, like a couple weeks after this was released. And he loved it. Like, they had been listening to it nonstop. And then we wound up going to this beach that he loved. And this huge blue heron flew directly over us. It was like spooky how it just was like, this is what inspired this. And now we're here with him, and he's inspired me. And now the blue heron is overhead, and just the best kind of the stuff that I love, those moments when they happen, they're priceless. And, so it's funny that you mentioned Guinevere, because definitely I've now sort of associate Cross with this music as well.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And you were talking about, like, earlier, about wanting to play this live as a piece again. And how did that go when you toured it? Did you explain it to people before you played it? Was the record already out at the point? Well, it can't have been, can it? Because the record came out like later. Just trying to get in my head how people experienced it.
Right. No, it was. So it came out in May of 21, and I did a short tour in December of that year. So it was out. And yeah, I kind of, obviously the piece alone is not enough for a full evening of music. So I would play some of my older songs, some newer songs. And then in the middle of the show, I would kind of stop and explain, the intent behind the piece, talk about my mom. And then I would say, I'm not going to talk now until it's over. Like, so don't be confused. But also I didn't want it to feel stuffy, like some classical concerts can sometimes feel, not all, but some. I didn't want people to feel uncomfortable, but I also wanted to explain, look, when I start this thing, we're going to play it till the end, and then we'll chat after. So, and that was cool, because I've just never gotten to do anything like that in my own show. And it was amazing to me. I was unsure how that would go over in the course of, especially being bookended by, just my other songs. But people, it really, really resonated with people. And I think that's been the most beautiful thing about writing this music from such a raw, real place, is how even to this day, I get notes from people saying, that this music has helped them through a hard time. And then even my mom will write me and say, I listened to the piece this morning and it just helped me so much. And it's like a gift that sort of keeps on giving. And, it's really, really, I don't take that for granted. It's really special.
Well, and that, I presume, is part of the reason that this is coming back out as a physical release in a few weeks. Yes. Yeah. No, it's, there's something about this that, there's something about, I imagine, I hope that people
could sit down with a vinyl or a CD. You know, I know most people don't listen to CDs anymore, but a lot of people have vinyl. And yeah, I think there's something very like, it's almost like there's something so intangible about the feelings where it's like everybody can relate, but it's also this thing that you're grasping at that makes having the physical version of it special. It wants to be in that form. So I'm really happy that it is going to be re-released in this way.
There's something about I still listen to CDs, and like sometimes I'll be sitting there with my headphones on and plugged into my phone, and that's fine. But sometimes I want to put a CD on because it's like making one choice that lasts like 30 or 40 minutes rather than 1x. It's going like, right, I'm choosing this as a chunk of thing to experience, and I'm not going to turn it off till it's done. And that's sometimes the physical product makes you do that in a way that you forget to do otherwise. Yes,
absolutely.
Well, good luck with it. I'm delighted it's coming back out because I missed it first time around, so I will definitely be buying one. I would not get away with not asking you slightly about I'm With Her, if that's okay, while I've got you.
Yeah.
Because you guys have a new record out, a new single.
Well, we put it out for hurricane relief. Yes, it's right now. It's just out on Bandcamp, and people can purchase it, can hear it, and hopefully purchase it because we're not. All the money is going to Hurricane Helene relief, specifically in Asheville. Yeah, it was just kind of like we were like, gosh, you know, I think everybody feels right now. How can we help? And we had recorded this Sabrina Carpenter song really just for fun. And we were like, oh, this could be a cool way to put it to use. And so, yeah, I'm glad that that's what we were able to do it for.
And is that, will there be more I'm With Her in due course, or is that kind of dependent on schedules? And
well, you know, nothing that I can talk about in hard terms in terms of dates or things, but the short answer is yes. We've been writing together on and off for the last couple of years, and we have a batch of songs that I'm incredibly excited about. So people can look forward to more I'm With Her very soon.
Oh, wonderful. And in the meantime, is there more touring for Polaroid Lovers? Is that an ongoing thing?
That is wrapped up, which is kind of a melancholy thing for me to say because I really wanted to come overseas with it. You know, I'm sure that I'm not the first person to say that. Just being honest, that being a touring musician and making it work with the expenses of traveling overseas right now is tough to figure out. And I hope fans know over there that it's not because I don't want to be over there touring this music, because I wanted to desperately, but just wasn't quite able to figure out a way to make it work this go around. But that's not to say that it won't happen at some point, you know, and it's just been an incredible year of so many shows touring this record and just had such an amazing time doing so. But yeah, that's pretty much wrapped up for the year.
I was lucky enough to get to see the release gig that you did at Rough Trade East over here. So
nice.
I did get to see you on the tour for this.
Great. Without drums. You got to see the trio version.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I'd seen you the summer before at Purbeck Folk Festival with the four-piece.
Oh, yeah.
So it was nice to hear some of the same songs kind of treated slightly differently.
Yeah, totally.
Well, best of luck with the release of Blue Heron Suite, and we will all look forward to some more I'm With Her in due course. It's been a real treat getting to talk to you. I love this record so much, and I really like kind of a chance to dive in and talk about this stuff.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It was fun to talk about.
Bluegrass Jamalong is proud to be sponsored by Collings Guitars and Mandolins, making some of the finest guitars and mandolins in the world since the 1970s. Visit collingsguitars.com and find out why.